In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 NBA games happening on March 3rd, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released, so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 NBA games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start: if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Detroit Pistons versus Cleveland Cavaliers. Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse on a night like this feels less like a building and more like a pressure cooker, especially when the home team shows up as the so-called underdog. The visiting side has the reputation, the recent buzz, and that quiet confidence of a group used to being treated as the safer choice, while Cleveland gets cast as the team that has to prove something. That kind of framing sounds small, but it gets into how a game is actually played, how a crowd reacts to every whistle, and how a team responds when the first real punch lands. Cleveland leans into that energy really well at home. The way they typically defend in their own building is not just about schemes on a whiteboard. It is about pride, physicality, and making every cut and catch feel a little uncomfortable. You can almost feel the first few minutes turning into a statement, with bodies on the floor, contested rebounds, and the crowd roaring at simple deflections like it is a buzzer beater. That kind of environment makes it harder for a favored opponent to just run their usual stuff, because every tiny stumble gets magnified and every dry stretch suddenly feels longer than it really is. There is also the hidden part of this kind of matchup, the mental side where the favorite has more to lose. When a team comes in expected to take care of business, there is less freedom to play loose, and a slow start can create that awkward tension you can almost see in the body language. On the other side, the underdog has that comfortable lane of, nobody expects us to roll here, so let us swing and see what happens, and that mindset often leads to sharper focus and more aggressive decisions. It is funny how that small difference can turn into extra closeouts, extra box outs, and a willingness to absorb contact instead of settling. Coaching also tilts things a bit toward the scrappy side in this kind of spot. When you are getting a little extra cushion on the scoreboard before the game even starts, the plan usually leans into making this feel like a grind, stringing together long, physical possessions and forcing the other bench to work harder for every clean look. One or two tweaks in rotation patterns, a well-timed timeout to stop a run, or a simple adjustment like attacking a weaker defender over and over can be enough to keep things tight all night. It rarely looks flashy, but it wears on the other team, and the crowd respects that kind of blue-collar effort. Honestly, this is the sort of matchup where backing the supposedly less shiny side feels uncomfortable, and that is exactly why it so often pays off. The home group has the crowd, the chip on the shoulder, and the kind of physical style that can drag a cleaner-looking favorite into a muddy game where those extra points suddenly feel huge by the final buzzer. As our first pick for this matchup, the Cleveland Cavaliers to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. When two teams are this familiar with each other, the game tends to slow down in all the quiet ways that do not always show up on highlight reels. Offenses spend more time hunting the right matchup, coaches call sets instead of just letting guys freelance, and you see more deliberate trips where every pass has a purpose. Early in a game like this, you might get a few quick bursts of pace, some transition looks, maybe a couple of heat-check threes that have the arena bouncing. Then things usually tighten. Defenders start sitting on pet actions they saw on film all week. Help arrives a half step earlier at the rim, and what looked like open space in the first quarter suddenly feels packed by the third. It is the basketball version of turning the dial from casual pickup run to something that feels much closer to playoff intensity. The physical tone matters too. On a cold March night, with a matchup that carries a little extra weight, players are far more willing to absorb contact, fight over screens, and chase shooters through multiple actions. That kind of effort does not usually translate to a free-flowing offensive rhythm. Instead, you get possessions that stretch longer, shots that come later in the clock, and trips to the foul line that break up whatever tempo was trying to build. Here is the thing: casual fans often hope for a wild shootout, but the script in games like this often bends toward control rather than chaos. Rotations get a bit shorter, coaches lean on the lineups they trust most on defense, and the ball spends more time in the hands of players who favor smart, patient decisions over constant high-risk plays. Even when both teams are capable of catching fire, the constant pressure of every possession pushes them towards safer, more careful offense, which naturally pulls the overall scoring pace down. Let me explain it another way. If every trip down the floor feels like it really matters, the number of rushed, low-quality shots tends to drop. That does not mean nobody scores, it just means the game often settles into a tighter, more controlled rhythm where big runs are harder to sustain and the scoreboard climbs more slowly than people might expect. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Dallas Mavericks versus Charlotte Hornets. Charlotte sits at 30-31-0, riding a 4-game heater and hanging around the back half of the Eastern playoff picture. Dallas drags a record of 21-39-0, stuck near the bottom of the West and coming off a rough home loss where they managed only 87 points against Oklahoma City. The public story feels simple. The home side is hot, the visitors are short-handed, and the spread reflects that gap. The thing is, Charlotte's strength actually sets up a sneaky argument for the other side of that number. Their offense is one of the most efficient units in the league, sitting in that top tier for overall production, shooting from deep at a strong clip, and pounding the offensive glass for a pile of second-chance looks every night. Moussa Diabate's work on the boards helps them squeeze extra possessions, which usually breaks an opponent's spirit more than any highlight dunk. But they do all this at a calmer tempo, with a pace that sits in the lower third of the league, more slow pressure cooker than run-and-gun video game. That kind of rhythm is fantastic for winning games, but when the spread climbs into that scary "are we sure about this" range, fewer possessions naturally give the underdog a little bit more wiggle room. Dallas, for all its problems, is not getting walked over on every possession. Their defense lives in the middle of the pack, which is not glamorous but also not hopeless, while the offense sits near the bottom of the league, weighed down by clunky spacing and one of the weaker three-point percentages around. So you get this odd profile. They do not score easily, they do not shoot cleanly, yet they stay attached just often enough because they do not completely fall apart on the other end. That usually leads to a lot of losses, just not always the kind of blowouts that match a huge number on the board. The injury picture for Dallas explains a lot of that grind. Najee Marshall, Cooper Flagg, P.J. Washington, Marvin Bagley III, Kyrie Irving, and Derek Lively II are all out, with Irving and Lively sidelined for the season and Flagg, Washington, Bagley, and Marshall dealing with their own issues. Klay Thompson sits in that day-to-day bucket with an adductor concern, which adds another bit of uncertainty on the perimeter. Everyone else we are talking about here, Chris Middleton, Max Christie, Caleb Martin, Daniel Gafford, Ryan Nembhard, Dwight Powell, Tyler Smith, and Brandon Williams, is on the active roster and expected to go. So the Mavs attack turns into a committee project. Middleton as the steady veteran, Christie and Martin flying around the wings, Gafford rolling to the rim, and the young guards trying to keep the car between the lines. It is not pretty basketball, but it is physical and long and full of players who are very aware that every minute they get right now is part of their audition tape. Zooming out for a second, Dallas is clearly treating this season as a soft reset, a chance to figure out who actually fits around Flagg when he is healthy and around Irving when he is back next year. Local coverage has been blunt about that reality, which sounds depressing on paper but does have one interesting betting side effect. Teams in evaluation mode often lean on effort guys, the ones playing like every game could be the one that keeps them in the league. That can keep you in more games than your reputation would suggest, especially when no one expects you to do much of anything on the scoreboard. Charlotte sits on the other side of that spectrum, with a clear identity and a very real sense of momentum. LaMelo Ball runs the show, Brandon Miller gives them scoring punch, Con Knueppel stretches the floor with that absurd rookie three-point record and elite accuracy, and Miles Bridges brings that downhill physicality. The bench has real depth, with Trey Mann, Josh Green, Liam McNeely, and Xavier Tillman all able to chew up rotation minutes without the whole thing falling apart. The current injury report lists them clean, which means they can lean into that full rotation and pick their matchups all night. They have won 7 of their last 10 and 15 of their last 20, and when a team goes on a heater like that, the market usually adjusts by making you pay extra to back them. That is where the spread gets interesting. Charlotte is the better team right now, with more cohesion, more shooting, and more clarity in who does what. They are also staring at a big nationally interesting game against Boston the very next night, which quietly nudges the focus toward managing energy across both nights instead of emptying the tank against a struggling Dallas group. The Mavericks, meanwhile, have had time to sit with that double-digit loss to Oklahoma City, and pride is still a real thing in a locker room, especially for younger players who hate the tank label. So you end up with a huge number attached to a home favorite that plays slower than casual fans realize, facing a road underdog that is flawed but scrappy, and that kind of cocktail can absolutely lead to a game that stays inside the margin longer than people expect. As our first pick for this matchup, the Dallas Mavericks to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. On the surface, this matchup screams offense, one side rolling with a top 5 attack that knocks down threes at a strong rate, the other side leaking points in too many recent games. Charlotte has been on a serious heater, with their overall offensive rating in the elite range and their scoring numbers since the start of the calendar year climbing even higher. Over their last 10 outings, they have been pouring in points in the mid-100 teens while holding opponents to numbers closer to the low 100s. Dallas, over that same stretch, has been giving up well into the 120s on average. If you stop there, it feels like a classic high-scoring spot where both teams should trade buckets all night. Here is the thing, the way these two teams actually play suggests something more controlled. Charlotte's pace sits on the slower side, in the upper 90s in terms of possessions, which means they are not trying to turn every night into a track meet. Dallas plays a bit faster, but not to an extreme, living in the low 100s in pace that feels more like decent tempo than non-stop sprint. So instead of frantic end-to-end action, you are likely looking at more half-court possessions, more deliberate sets, and more value in every offensive trip. When total scoring expectations get high, a game with fewer possessions by design quietly pulls the rug out from underneath those assumptions. Now layer on the injuries from a pure scoring perspective. Dallas is missing Cooper Flagg and Kyrie Irving, who are the main engines of their shot creation when they are on the floor, plus P.J. Washington, Marvin Bagley III, Najee Marshall, and Derek Lively II. That is a lot of points, drives, putbacks, and spacing taken out of the equation. Everyone else we mentioned earlier is active, but the structure changes. Middleton can still create, Christie and Martin can attack gaps, Gafford is dangerous as a lob threat, and the young guards handle the ball, yet the overall ceiling of the offense drops. We just watched this group score only 87 points at home against Oklahoma City, and that fits the larger pattern of an offense that has to work very hard to sniff triple digits. Charlotte's offense, on the other hand, really is humming. They launch threes with confidence, and with Knueppel splashing them at over 44% while already breaking the record for made threes by a rookie, every defensive mistake on the perimeter gets punished. However, scoring efficiency is not the same thing as constant chaos. They use their spacing to create clean looks, then pound the glass with Diabate and company for extra chances, and that cycle takes time on the clock. Their defense has climbed to around league average in rating, and recent stretches holding opponents near 107 points show they are not just trying to win shootouts, they are actually getting stops. Put a respectable Dallas defense on the other side, which they do still have, and the overall scoring environment feels more like steady pressure than wild exchange. Game flow matters a lot for the total, and here it tilts in a way that can actually suppress scoring. If Charlotte gets comfortable control of the game, they have every reason to throttle back the pace, play through the paint, and lean into their depth instead of chasing style points. There is also that looming game against Boston the next night, and coaches in that situation often shorten the number of high-stress possessions for their main guys once they feel the job is under control. That usually means more bench minutes for Mann, Green, McNeely, and Tillman, more drives and simple reads, and fewer quick trigger threes early in the clock. Dallas has its own reasons to slow things down on offense. A team in evaluation mode, especially one missing its top creators, tends to experiment with lineups, defensive looks, and half-court sets. All that tinkering can clog up the flow, which means more broken possessions, more time drained from the shot clock, and more empty trips. It is not pretty, but it soaks up time. When you stitch all of this together, a picture starts to form of a game that leans more toward control than fireworks. A slower pace from the stronger offense, a short-handed attack from the underdog side, decent defense on both ends, and the very real possibility of long stretches where the clock moves and the scoreboard creeps rather than explodes. A final that lands in the neighborhood of something like 116 to 104 fits this script far more often than a full-blown track meet where both sides are flying past their usual scoring ranges. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Washington Wizards versus Orlando Magic. Big spreads like this always look simple on the surface, but they rarely feel simple if you are holding a ticket. Orlando is sitting in that solid, respectable range with a record around 31-28, while Washington is stumbling through a season closer to 16-44, and that gap alone can make this look like a mismatch before the ball even tips. The eye test says varsity versus junior squad, but the number on this game is not asking who is better, it is asking whether one side can or will keep the margin under control for a full 48 minutes. Orlando just had one of those letdown nights at home against Detroit, a 106-92 loss where everything felt a bit stuck in the mud. The offense never really popped, the shots looked heavy, and on the glass they were the ones getting leaned on instead of doing the leaning. That lines up with who they have been most of the year, somewhere in the middle both offensively and defensively, good enough to win plenty of nights, but not exactly a flamethrower that buries teams on command. They still live with a weaker outside shot, hanging in the lower part of the league in three-point accuracy, hovering in that mid-30% neighborhood that keeps them from ripping off those instant knockout runs as often as you might expect from a clear favorite. Teams like that can absolutely control games, but they do not always run away with them, especially when they are coming off a reminder that nothing is automatic. Washington, on the other hand, is pure noise in game form. They play fast, with a pace that sits a bit over 100 possessions per 48, and they pair that speed with the worst net rating in the league. The offense is shaky, the defense is softer than it should be, and every possession can feel like somebody hit random on a video game slider. Yet that same chaos is what keeps them lurking around spreads like this. They just pushed Houston in a 123-118 loss, hitting 19 of 35 from deep and clawing back from nearly 20 points down to make things uncomfortable late for a team that thought it had the night in hand. That is exactly the kind of underdog profile that makes covering a huge margin tricky because they never quite agree that the game is over, even when the scoreboard says it should be. Orlando is also not walking into this one perfectly whole. Their rotation on the wing has taken a real hit, with a key forward sidelined indefinitely by a left high ankle sprain and a guard floating on that game-time decision bubble on recent reports. That usually nudges a coach into trusting a shorter group and thinking about stamina along with score, instead of just flooring the gas for 48 minutes. It is not that they cannot win comfortably, they absolutely can. It is that stretching that comfort into a full-scale blowout requires cleaner execution and deeper energy than a slightly patched-up lineup always has in its pocket. So you end up with a sturdy favorite that leans on physicality and structure facing a reckless, up-tempo underdog that is perfectly willing to turn garbage time into a track meet. Honestly, that is the kind of mix that invites weird endings, late rallies, and the sort of backdoor cover that only seems surprising if you did not watch how Washington plays. As our first pick for this matchup, the Washington Wizards to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Washington lives in games where the scoreboard operator stays busy. Their defense is near the bottom of the league, their structure breaks down often, and they combine that with a tempo that keeps pushing the pace rather than slowing it down to fix anything. That 123-118 loss to Houston is a pretty clean snapshot, lots of possessions, plenty of clean looks, and a barrage of threes where they drilled 19 of 35. When a team plays that fast and defends that poorly, it is hard for the total to stay quiet for long. Orlando brings a very different style, but the numbers still find their way upward against this kind of opponent. They sit somewhere around league average on both ends, and while their outside shooting can betray them, the way they attack weaker defenses still leads to healthy totals. They have put up 118 on Milwaukee and another 118 on Brooklyn not by suddenly turning into a supercharged shooting team, but by pounding the paint, getting to the line, and crashing the offensive glass like it is a competitive drill. Against a soft defense, that kind of steady, physical approach adds up possession by possession, even if the box score does not show a barrage of threes. Washington is also coming off that high-scoring battle with Houston, and the wear and tear tends to show up more on defense than on offense. Legs get tired a little faster on closeouts, rotations drag half a beat late, and all of a sudden those drives and dump-offs that looked contested a quarter ago are turning into layups and free throws. Their front court is not exactly loaded with depth right now either, and with a long list of bumps and bruises hanging over the roster, asking them to suddenly turn this into a grind-heavy, low-scoring half-court grind feels like wishful thinking. Here is the thing, matchups like this are built for runs. Orlando can lean into that physical, paint-focused style and find steady points against a defense that has shown all year it can be bent. Washington, even when they are clearly behind, has no real interest in slowing down the game. They just keep shooting, especially from deep, and once the benches enter the picture, the pace often picks up even more. Large gaps on the scoreboard often help the scoring rather than hurt it because the leading side relaxes, the trailing side chucks, and nobody is too stressed about each possession besides the folks holding tickets. Both teams can realistically flirt with triple digits in this kind of rhythm, even if they arrive there in very different ways. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. New York Knicks versus Toronto Raptors. Toronto at home with New York walking in as the bully ball guest feels like one of those nights where the tone is set by contact, not cute highlights on social media. New York comes in sitting in that strong playoff tier, around 39-22 on the season, while Toronto is in that scrappy chasing group in the mid-30s to mid-20s, competitive but still trying to fully define its ceiling. The styles clash in a way that feels familiar if you have watched these teams over the past year, with New York leaning into slow, structured, bruising possessions and Toronto leaning into length, movement, and balance rather than pure star isolation. Recent history between these two is not subtle. New York has taken all three meetings this season, winning by comfortable double-digit margins each time, including that early blowout in New York and two decisive wins in Toronto where the gap never really felt in doubt for long stretches. Stretch the tape back and it looks even more lopsided, with New York stacking 11 straight wins in the series and Toronto not having tasted a victory against this group since that matchup in early 2023. This does not guarantee anything tonight, and it never does in this league, but it does suggest that the way these rosters interact has been leaning one direction for quite a while. But New York's identity has settled into something very clear, almost stubbornly clear. The tempo stays slow, the possessions are deliberate, and the offense is built to grind advantages from the half court with steady handling, strong screening, and heavy physical contact at the rim. On paper, that has shown up as one of the most efficient offenses in the league paired with a defense that sits in the upper tier as well, and the net rating reflects a team that is not just winning but generally winning the minutes by solid margins. Over the last couple of weeks, the defensive surge has been even louder, with numbers that place them right at the top of the league over a 15-game window and a few statement efforts where opponents were held in the high 80s or low 90s and forced into ugly, late-clock looks. Toronto arrives with a different personality, a little more fluid and a little less blunt. The attack runs through a collection of long, skilled players who like to handle, make reads, and play through the elbows, with Scotty Barnes and Brandon Ingram often acting as those hubs and Emmanuel Quickley and R.J. Barrett providing creation from the guard and wing spots. Defensively, this group has also been strong, sitting in that top section of the league in terms of points allowed and defensive rating, using length and activity more than sheer size to bother passing lanes and contest shots. On the offensive side, though, they land closer to the middle, and when facing the more physical, well-drilled half-court defenses, their rhythm can stall into contested jumpers and possessions that look more improvised than scripted. The personnel edges that matter for a spread tend to show up in the front court and in how deep the rotations can go when the game starts to get heavy in the second half. For New York, the expectation that Mitchell Robinson is available in this one is a big deal, not just in name but in what it means for rim protection and defensive rebounding, especially with the staff clearly treating his minutes and rest pattern like a key project because of how much the overall defense spikes when he is on the floor. They can still slide Karl Anthony Towns around and play him in different roles, but having that anchor behind him smooths out a lot of the coverage choices. On the Toronto side, the absence of Colin Murray-Boyles and Chucky Hepburn trims some of the depth and energy on the wing and in the backcourt, and while those are not headliner names, they are the kind of pieces that keep a team fresh against a physically demanding opponent across 4 quarters. Recent form lines up with that picture. New York has been stacking impressive wins, including that smothering performance against San Antonio, a loud road victory in Milwaukee, a controlled result in Chicago, and a tight, resilient finish against Houston, with only that off-shooting night in Cleveland spoiling an otherwise dominant short stretch. Toronto has had some nice moments too with quality wins in Milwaukee and Chicago and a big scoring night against Washington, but it has also dropped games at home to Oklahoma City and San Antonio where the consistency slipped and the defense did not quite hold up for the full game. When you put the matchup history, current form, rotation health, and stylistic clash together, the spread feels tilted toward the side that has been more trustworthy in these exact kinds of physical, low-margin games. As our first pick for this matchup, the New York Knicks to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Scoring-wise, this meeting looks much more like a playoff-style grinder than some kind of free-flowing offensive showcase, even though both teams have weapons that can get hot. The tempo profiles tell that story pretty clearly, with New York living in the slower half of the league and Toronto hovering just a touch quicker but still far from being one of those track meet teams that tries to run on every miss. Possessions come measured, sets get called, and a lot of trips end with someone working deep into the clock, especially against defenses that know the scouting report this well. The recent game logs back up the idea that totals involving these two are more likely to land in that manageable range than explode into something wild. New York's last handful of contests have featured several games where the combined scores settled in the low 200s, with that one Milwaukee outing nudging a bit higher but still not turning into a complete scoring festival. San Antonio was held under 90, Cleveland was dragged into a similarly low-scoring environment, Chicago saw a tight, controlled total, and even the Houston game finished in a band that felt competitive without becoming frantic. Toronto tells a similar story when facing solid defenses, with that win in Milwaukee, the trip to Chicago, and the home date with San Antonio all ending with totals that sat comfortably below the kind of number you would associate with a full-blown offensive shootout. The one true outlier was the Washington game, and that came against a defense that has been giving up big nights to almost everyone, which is a very different context than the one sitting in front of them here. Both teams lean on defensive structure and physicality, and that has a real effect on how many points usually go up on the board. New York's recent stretch has had them sitting right near the top of the league in defensive efficiency, using strength, communication, and a willingness to live with tough twos instead of open threes. Toronto is not far behind in spirit, if not quite at the same recent peak, landing in that group that consistently holds opponents in the low 100s and forcing them to earn points through bodies and length rather than broken coverage. When both sides bring that kind of attention to detail, the game tends to slow down naturally, even without anyone consciously talking about pace. The offensive styles also lean toward a more modest combined score. New York prefers to run its offense through steady pick and roll, inside-out actions, and patient reads, not constant quick threes from deep early in the shot clock. Toronto likes to attack from the elbows and mid-post, with Barnes and Ingram probing and kicking, and Quickly and Barrett choosing their moments to attack gaps, which often means more trips into the paint, more fouls, and more half-court sets that eat time. Neither side is built on overwhelming three-point volume or extreme pace, and that usually translates into totals that land closer to the low 200 range rather than flirting with very high combined numbers on a regular basis. There is always a world where foul trouble, a hot shooting night from several role players, or some overtime chaos pushes a total well above what the rhythm of the game suggests, and anyone who has watched this league for long has seen that script play out. Still, when you focus on what these teams usually are, not just what they could be on their best or worst nights, the mix of slower tempo, sturdy defense, and preference for half-court execution gently, but pretty clearly, leans toward a final score that comes in under what the market is asking for this matchup. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Brooklyn Nets versus Miami Heat. Brooklyn rolling into Miami feels like two teams living in different stories. One side is sitting at 15-45, stuck in an 8-game skid, still shaking off a tight loss to Cleveland where they came up just short again. They are back on the floor for the second time in 3 days, this time on the road, and that kind of quick turnaround matters when you lean on young legs and late-game energy as much as they do. Their offense has felt like driving with the parking brake on all season. Scoring has hovered around the bottom of the league, the efficiency is ugly, and the pace crawls along while everyone else is flying. A huge chunk of their shots comes from jumpers and a heavy diet of threes, so some nights it looks like a modern clinic and other nights it looks like a rec league team that stayed too long after shoot-around. With big minutes going to kids like Nolan Traore, Danny Wolf, and Drake Powell, you get those very human stretches where they look brilliant for a few minutes, then lost for the next few. It is exactly what you expect from a development year, great for the future, a little brutal if you are holding a ticket on them right now. On the other side, Miami sits at 32-29 and on top of their division, which tells you they are not exactly a juggernaut, but they are steady and they know who they are. They just handled Houston in their last outing, winning by double digits and dropping well over 100 while bullying the Rockets inside for a huge chunk of those points in the paint. This is the team playing at the fastest tempo in the league, pushing the ball, attacking early, and turning defensive rebounds into immediate pressure the other way. Even with one of their main scorers, Norman Powell, sidelined by that groin issue, they did not look short on firepower. Bam Adebayo set the tone inside, Tyler Herro slid comfortably back into a bigger role, and rookie big Kel'el Ware has quietly started stacking those blue-collar double-double type nights that coaches love. Brooklyn's slow, jumper-heavy profile runs right into Miami's fast, paint-driven style, and that contrast is not kind to the team that has to chase back in transition all night. You have a rested home team, comfortable in its identity, facing a rebuilding group that still oscillates between promising and chaotic, and the market is already treating this like a big number spot for the hosts. In matchups like this, you are not just betting talent, you are betting maturity, decision-making, and how each coaching staff manages the flow of the game, and Miami checks more of those boxes right now. As our first pick for this matchup, the Miami Heat to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Miami wants to play fast, and not just pretend fast, but actually get shots up early in the clock and keep pressure on the rim for 4 quarters. They just hung a strong total on Houston without Powell, which shows the system is built to create points even when one weapon is missing. Brooklyn, on the other hand, has that combination you see in a lot of rebuilding teams, a defense that leaks and an offense that shoots plenty of threes. When you blend a leaky defense with a three-heavy approach, you usually get volatility, which is basically code for swings on the scoreboard. The usual fear with a game like this is that if one side stretches the gap, everything slows down. People picture benches emptying, the clock bleeding out, and everyone jogging through the last 6 minutes like it is a preseason scrimmage. Honestly, this specific matchup does not quite fit that lazy script. The Nets' young core is still trying to prove they belong, so they do not really have a coast mode yet. They just played Cleveland tough and still managed to get themselves into that low triple-digit range in a game that did not exactly break friendly for them. Across this rough stretch, they keep landing somewhere near that mark because the coaching staff clearly wants real possessions, real reads, and real mistakes they can teach from later. Miami, for its part, is not the grinded-out half-court group you might still have in your head from past seasons. This version pushes the pace, attacks off the dribble, and keeps coming even late in games. That win over Houston was built on living in the paint and at the line, and that kind of approach usually travels from quarter to quarter. Even with Powell in street clothes, there is more than enough scoring juice between Adebayo punishing mismatches, Herro working off handoffs, Andrew Wiggins sliding into those slashing and catch-and-shoot pockets, and Ware cleaning up around the rim. Davion Mitchell hovering on that day-to-day line gives them another guard who can keep the ball moving and pressure the rim when he is available. On the Brooklyn side, the front-court presence of Nick Claxton matters a lot for the rhythm of the game. Even when he is dealing with that thumb issue, his ability to finish lobs, contest shots, and ignite fast breaks with rebounds keeps the tempo from bogging down completely. Igor Dimon missing time does take a bit of ball handling and playmaking off the floor, which sounds like it might hurt scoring, but it also forces more responsibility onto other guards and wings who are naturally wired to attack and shoot. That often means more quick decisions, more pull-up threes, and more possessions that either end in a clean jumper or a run out the other way. Put it all together, and you are looking at a style matchup where one team wants to run, the other team ends up running with them whether they like it or not, and the kids on the floor are trying to make an impression rather than milk the clock. Fast possessions, heavy paint attacks, plenty of threes, and very little incentive for either side to play a slow, methodical game should keep the numbers climbing. Even if the margin on the scoreboard stretches at times, the way these rotations are built suggests the pace and aggression stay high enough for this one to land in a clearly high-scoring window by the final buzzer. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.